When the time is right, you'll know. I'm Rob Murgatroyd, and I can hear the voice inside your head from here. You're ready for your next chapter, but you're unclear on what that looks like and how to make it happen. On the Next Chapter podcast, you'll be inspired to let go of your current identity and shift into a brand new chapter of your life that makes you feel alive. The struggles you're facing now will be substantiated by success stories that'll feel like your own. You'll walk away with tangible strategies backed by experiential evidence that will bring your next chapter to life. Your next chapter is achievable, and it's closer than you think. Today on the Next Chapter, I have Adele Wang. All right, so I was scrolling TikTok as I do, and I came across a woman that was sharing a story of how her healthy athlete husband one morning decided to go out for a run. And the worst thing that a wife could ever imagine happened that morning. And I'm not going to tell it to you here in the intro. I'm going to let Adele tell her own story. It's right at the beginning of the podcast. I wanted to have her on because some of our next chapters are carefully designed, right? Some people work with me as a coach and we work together on what it looks like. Other people just have a sense that the writing is on the wall for them and they're ready to do something new. But other people have a next chapter that wasn't crafted, wasn't designed, that just happens. And Adele's story of her next chapter is going to give you a lot to think about in as far as not wasting time with bullshit, if I can just say it the way it is, not wasting time with things that just don't matter in your life. And I think Adele did a really, really good job of explaining the importance of that. So without further ado, here is Adele Wang. Adele.
Hello, how are you, Rob?
I am so good. Nice to meet you. You're in Atlanta, yeah?
I am, and I was just listening to your previous show, and oh, Rob used to live here.
So crazy. What part of Atlanta are you in?
Alpharetta. Where were you?
I was in Buckhead, spent a lot of time in Alpharetta. Country Club of the South was the place I hung out in the most. And then I decided that that wasn't my life. I didn't need a McMansion. It just seemed like too much, didn't it?
It is. Yeah, I'm not too far from Country Club of the South. I mean, it's lovely. And some people love that kind of thing. And I just kind of nod and say, okay,
Well, we're going to get into all of that. Usually after doing a zillion of these, I find that the best stuff is always right in the chit chat. So before we jump in, a couple of questions I want to ask you. What would make this interview a home run for you?
A couple things. One is if we can get out of this self-improvement mantra that everyone's always trying to be more whatever, because it makes it feel like wherever you are now sucks. Basically, life shouldn't feel like a constant self-improvement project. And the second piece is I'm not hearing a lot of people talk about the destructive parts of things like law of attraction and how it's really wrecking people's happiness because there's this idea I should be more positive and happy. So they're sort of related, but these two themes are something that I talk about a lot with clients. It's a little bit edgier, it's a little bit more, hey, it's not that it's wrong to think positive, but if that's all you've got, life can feel like constantly trying to put on a happy face so that you can attract whatever.
Well, let's get into it. I am so excited to have you here. And, this podcast is designed to help people consider their next chapter, right? But sometimes that decision is actually made for them, whether you wanted to or not. And if you're comfortable talking about it, I'd like to ask you, it's a little bit of an unusual way to start the show, but I'd still like to ask you the story of what happened recently when your husband went out for a jog, because I'd like to use this as a lens in which to have this conversation about real life.
Absolutely. Yes. This has been the biggest shock and challenge of my life. Bill and I were together for about 17 years. I was considered him my best friend, soulmate, and he has always been very athletic, healthy, no sign whatsoever that anything was wrong. And last month, one morning, he woke me up early in the morning, said, I'm taking the dog out. He loves to walk the dog. Why don't you come with me? And I said, oh my God, it's too early. It was kind of dark and rainy out. And I'm like, no. And so I went back to bed. And then about an hour, well, maybe 45 minutes later, the phone rang, and it was his phone on my cell phone. And I was like, oh, hey, how's it going? And it was a police officer. And she said, there's been an incident involving your husband. I'm like, what? I thought, did he get mugged? Did he get hit by a car? She wouldn't tell me. She said, I don't want to get into it on the phone. Let me come to your house. I'm just a couple minutes away. So I had no idea what that could be. And so a couple minutes later, a patrol car rolls up in front of the house, and she gets out, and I noticed she had my dog, but Bill wasn't with her. So that was my first sense something has happened. And she told me that Bill had been found in the park here in Alpharetta. He had been on the ground without a pulse and not breathing. And EMT was there. Basically, our dog, who's half German Shepherd, half Great Pyrenees, went crazy, was barking out of control, basically trying to either rescue or protect Bill when he's on the ground. And at that time in the morning, there are not very many people walking around, unfortunately. So our dog was barking and attracted the attention of a park worker who rushed up. Why is this dog barking crazy? But he didn't speak English. So he flagged down a passerby who dialed 911. EMT rushed there. Big problem was they didn't know how long he had been out. And when someone has this situation, every minute counts. So they were able to do some defibrillation to restore a pulse. My husband was rushed to the hospital in the ER. So this officer is telling me all this. And so I jumped in the car, rushed to the ER. And I remember the ER doc pulling me aside, saying, this is not good. I'm very concerned. You might want to consider getting the family here, because this is a situation called VFib, ventricular fibrillation. It's an arrhythmia of the heart. Because I'm like, what are you talking about? He's an athlete. I mean, he's perfectly healthy. And she's like, don't know what happened. But the biggest problem is he was down. And when these things happen, if there's someone who's right there, you're lucky. But at 6:15 in the morning, on a rainy, cold morning, there are not very many people out. So, I called Bill's family. They came up from Florida. It was mass panic. What happened? Because this was completely a shock. There was no hint. My husband's always been very healthy. And the doctors are saying, well, we can only go by what we see here. So he was admitted to ICU, and he was in a medically induced coma, similar to the athlete that just fell on the football field. Similar problem with arrhythmia, except his arrhythmia was caused by a blow to the chest. But my understanding is that there are actually 7 deadly types of arrhythmia. I learned a lot about arrhythmia in the last month. And VFib is a killer because there's no way to screen for it. It just hits. So they did the typical protocol, which is to try to cool the brain to reduce further damage. And then there's a thawing process. And then you hope to God that someone wakes out of the coma. And so we were there around the clock, talking to Bill, telling him stories. His best friend flew in. I mean, we did everything humanly possible. And with every passing day, the doctor said, this is not looking good. Because by now we would have hoped he would wake up. The probability of someone waking up out of a deep coma decreases with every passing day. Of course, we didn't want to give up. They don't have a crystal ball. They said, well, let's just see. Everything was wait and see, wait and see. And it came to a point where we had to have a family meeting with the doctors. And the ICU doctor said, he was a neurologist. He said, at this point, the problem is he's not getting better. All EEG, EKG, CAT scan, all this stuff, he's not actively dying, but he's not improving. The problem is no one can live in this state of just sort of hooked up to a trach tube, a ventilator. He's existing, but the question now is, what would he want? Because this type of state can go on forever. Is this what he would want? And it was an agonizing decision. And, Rob, I had already decided years ago that the worst possible decision I could ever have to make is something like this. I don't care about myself, but don't put me in the decision of having to make this horrible decision of life or death on behalf of somebody else that I love. Because I had read so many stories about families having to make this difficult decision when someone is on life support. What do you want to do? The doctor said there are two paths at this point. You could either have him put in a long care facility, hooked up to a trach tube, breathing tube, not able to recognize anybody. He's not conscious. He's just sort of existing. And you pray to God maybe one day. But he said the prognosis of any meaningful life is very low, meaning being able to communicate, even have a conversation, even recognize you. Because at this point, it's mostly just involuntary movement because the extent of brain damage is severe. Or you can decide to move in a hospice direction. So he was very compassionate, and the family, we just couldn't believe this was happening. How does this happen that a healthy person just drops like this? The nurses and the doctors in the ER said, we see this a handful of times a year. People in their 20s, perfect health, that the first symptom is often the last symptom. And all of a sudden, life becomes really clear in terms of life is precious, life is short. You just don't know what will happen. And a lot of times these things happen for no reason. Nothing, you can't connect the dots and say, oh, last week he had shortness of breath, or there's nothing. Sometimes the first symptom is the last one. And that's very sobering. So we finally made a very painful and difficult decision to go down the path of hospice. And that was very difficult because you have someone whose the internal organs are healthy, lung, liver, kidney, everything's great, but the brain is damaged. And the doctor said, this is the worst case scenario because you have someone who's basically healthy and strong, but you can't live without a brain, which means hospice takes longer. Oh my God. It's the opposite of what you would hope for, because by that time, let's save someone the suffering. Before that, it's like, let's make him better. And now it's like, okay, once you've made this decision, how long will this agony last? Fortunately, in our case, it wasn't too long. And so, he did pass. But this experience has really awakened me to the mystery of life. You can plan for a lot of things, but there's no guarantee. There's no guarantee that all the positivity in the world might not have something like this happen. I know people want a reason. They want a cause and an effect. And it's a very human desire. This doesn't make sense. It must be because of A, B, or C. Was he this? Was he that? No. And the answer is no, or we don't know. Short of a full-blown autopsy, which would cost 20 grand out of your pocket, it's very difficult to know what really occurred. So, this has been a very difficult time, and it's really forced me to dig deep on the nature of what are we doing here? And Bill was the kind of guy that touched a lot of lives. I'm hearing from all of his employees, they're a mess. I'm learning about a side of him that I didn't know. The chief medical information officer of the whole company, Microsoft Nuance, it reached out. I'm like, I'm just his wife. I had no idea, but he was very highly regarded, not just for his skill, but his ability to lead and support people. So yeah, it's been a very, very painful and soulful experience.
Just for people listening so that they understand the time frame we're talking about, this is not something that happened 10 years ago.
No, this would have been 4 weeks and 3 days ago is when he collapsed. I'm counting. So we're 4 weeks and 3 days ago, he collapsed. He passed away 2 weeks later on December 22nd. So this is still very fresh. And grief is probably one of the most primal experiences we can have on the planet. It is exactly proportional to the amount of love. There's simply no way around it.
Explain that.
You really can't love fully and then have no grief. It's not possible. It's not possible.
Oh, I see. So grief, the amount of love that you had for the person, well, that makes perfect sense, because if somebody passes that I didn't care for, I'm not connected in any way. But I never thought about the opposite. The deeper you're connected to the person,
The more the grief.
the more the grief.
And I think this is a topic that us as humans don't have enough conversations around. We are a culture that's very afraid of death. It's something people shy away from. I'm hoping that we can have simple but profound conversations that help hug people. You don't need to run screaming from the room in terror, because that was me in the beginning. I'm like, I don't want to hear this. Like, my brain just could not go to the prospect of a life without Bill. The entire time in the ICU, in the ER, my brain just couldn't go there. It's too overwhelming. And I'm saying in the split second of 3 minutes, life tilted. That's all it takes for brain damage. My entire future of a life has radically shifted 180. Because when you're in a partnership, it's a vision forward, not just yourself, but with someone. You're sharing a life together. And when that suddenly goes away, I think it's different if someone has had an illness. Loss is loss. I'm not saying one is any better or worse than the other, but sudden loss has a specific flavor. I think that's different than all the other types. They're all bad. They're all hard. Loss of a spouse probably is way up there. Only maybe loss of a child might be the only thing worse. Loss is loss, but each one is different. But sudden loss, I think, has its own shock.
You are, at least from what I can see, handling this remarkably well. What's going on deep inside of you? Is this just you keeping your shit together, but inside you're torn apart?
Yes and yes. It's beyond words. Grief is like trying to describe love. How do you describe love? You can write poems about it, but in the end, it's something you just experience. And grief is the same way. I think what has helped me, fortunately, is a strong path because of what I do in working with hundreds of thousands of people around the world around presence and things like that. That I only got to that point due to earlier traumas in my life of presence. That has really helped me. Grief is horrible. If I'm not on a Zoom with you now, I guarantee you when we're done, I'm probably going to be a mess. But I feel like this is an important enough conversation for the audience. Like, can we sit with this without shaking in terror that it is part of life? And if we can at least talk about it, we don't have to be so paranoid about it. This is a conversation that I think requires a village instead of people grieving by themselves at home alone in their apartment, which is what typically happens. We can have a community, this podcast, what you're doing, this message. I know there are going to be people in the audience grieving, whether it's the loss of a loved one or even the loss of a relationship, loss of a job. Grief has its own unspeakable flavor. And how lovely to have podcasts like what you're doing that don't try to placate people. Say there are things I wish people would stop doing because they don't help when someone's in grief. People don't know what to say, so they start yapping to make themselves better. And so the person who's grieving just sort of tolerates it. There are no words.
There aren't any words. Like I said at the opening, you were sort of forced into your next chapter. This was not something that was calculated, and here you are. Forgive this question if it comes across in any way other than how I intend it to be. Do you feel that this is something that happened to you, or is this something that happened for you?
I love that question. I have heard that expression before. My position, just me, is I don't really go there because I feel like it sets up a framework of like a lot of mental exercise. Everything's happening for me. I'm not a victim. Everything's happening for my higher good and all that stuff. For me, that has only made me feel worse. It's not that it's wrong, but the framework doesn't fit. I prefer to sit with, I don't know. People want to know, is it this or is it that? Am I a victim or is this happening for my higher good? I would never say loss of your best friend, soulmate, spouse was for my higher good. I would never say that to a client. I would never suggest that to anyone, or that your diagnosis of cancer is for your higher good. I mean, I don't really subscribe to that framework. I would rather sit with the I don't know and the acceptance of what is, of not trying to interpret too much. I think it's more helpful for me to say with I don't know, and I'm not fighting it anymore. I don't know why I have this diagnosis. I don't know why this divorce happened. I don't know why my child was run over by a bus. The need to know why adds an extra layer of suffering. So if it helps people to say, oh, this is for my higher good, it's happening for me, fine. I get a little nauseous at that because it sets up the idea that there's somebody out there knows. I believe there is something beyond our pay grade going on, but I am not privy to that right now. And if I try to peek into the mind of God, I know that the whatever comes back right now is still kind of a mentalized version. It's a narrative about how life works. And I find it sometimes painful to tell people, this is happening for you, not to you. I mean, I've heard that. To you implies we're all a victim.
Yeah.
The honest truth is we're all a victim of something sometimes. There are things beyond our control. And there's a little bit of, I chafe a little bit at the idea that nothing is ever our fault. There are things that happen that are beyond our control. So we are in a way a victim.
Mm-hmm.
If the bottom of the stock market or the housing market crashed in 2008, people lost their homes. To say, well, that happened for you or to you due to misdeeds of other humans, I don't know. I just know it was a crap show. So this idea of trying to figure out whether you're a victim or not, for me, I just set it aside. There's plenty of time for the spiritual gymnastics later. But when people are in pain, I have not found that narrative to be useful.
Okay. The world that, perhaps you and I are in on social media, the game that we're playing here is filled with, I live in Florence, Italy, and I see these girls walking around in big hats, big dresses, and they're playing the influencer game and hashtag live your best life and all the bullshit that's associated with it. And I get it. There's a 20, 30 something year old factor that's associated to that. But by and large, if we scroll our social media, we're going to find one law of attraction thing after the next, right? So I know you have some strong feelings on that. Tell me your thoughts on sort of this movement that the world seems to be in, talking about manifestation, law of attraction, et cetera.
Yeah. Well, gosh, how much time do you have, Rob? And this is something that I feel really strongly about because it really messed me up earlier on. That I came from a lifetime of logic, achievement. You got to be smart, right? And I was depressed, and I didn't know why. I said, well, I need to fix it. If you got a problem, you got to fix yourself. So I tried self-help and all this stuff. None of that worked. And then one day I stumbled upon some spiritual book on law of attraction. And I said, aha, this is the solution. So I went all the way. And let me tell you, those 10 years were the most miserable of my life because, oh my gosh, if you're listening out there, I will stand on a mountain and just shout to the world. It is still, if you deep dive underneath all that law of attraction stuff on being positive, it's a desire to control life. It is no different than fundamental religion. Do these 10 things and your life will be good. It's just translated to, well, if you think this way, life will be good. So you think life happens. If you think positive, life will be good. Life is way more complex than that. It's people wanting to control life. If you really look under law of attraction, under the hood, it is a desire to make things happen a certain way. And the reality is there's a lot that happens that's simply out of your control. I'm not saying a positive approach isn't useful. Of course it is. But to say that that's the only thing, you create every moment. All right, did my husband create his death? Did this child create their childhood leukemia through some negative thinking when they're 5? I mean, come on. Then compassion goes out the window. If my neighbor's house burns down, well, they must have been negative. And, that's not me. It's up to them. I'm one of the chosen. Compassion has flown out the window. It's a very egocentric view of me, myself, and I, with no acknowledgement of community, that maybe we can help each other, that what happens to you does impact me. It's not you, Rob, over there all by himself. Rob is supported by a community of teachers, audience. We're all in this together, but law of attraction is a very individualist, hyper me, myself, and I. What happens to you? Well, that's your problem. I'm not saying visioning and moving towards what you want isn't helpful. Of course it is, but it's not the only thing. Law of attraction makes no room for the mystery. Why did my husband suddenly die from VFib when he was happy, healthy, in a job he loved, surrounded by all kinds of great things? It keeps people from digging a little bit deeper into the mystery of life. There are some things we'll never know. I don't care how spiritually evolved you are, how many hours you meditate, your karma, your vibration, all that stuff. At the end of the day, there are things that we are not privy to. And how are you with that? The ego says, I know why things happen. So law of attraction to me is very egocentric. I'm not saying that positive thoughts aren't useful. Of course they are. But if that's all you've got, life becomes one big self-improvement project to become more positive all the time. They're thinking, well, I try to manifest, it didn't work, so I got to work it harder. The first thing I ask is, how are you really feeling about this? Not what you want to feel. What are you really feeling? The heart is breaking. Let's start with how you honestly feel. And they can't even articulate how they really feel. They're so scared of saying anything negative. In my book, anything honest is positive. Even if it's your heart is breaking or you're raging about this, or anything honest is positive. Start there. Because if you don't even know how you really feel, everything else is a lie.
I'm picking up what you're saying. So let me say it back to you because I want to make sure I'm tracking. You're saying that when there's something that's going on, like a broken heart, and that is ignored and swapped out for somebody having some faux manifestation, I can't have a negative thought, they will wind up, perhaps, my word, not yours, repressing some of this stuff and not truly dealing with what the issue is and getting lost in this, I can't feel that way. I can't say those words. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, you're basically lying to yourself.
Yeah.
So, for example, if someone comes up to you and stabs you in the hand with a knife and you're bleeding all over, the most positive thing you could probably say is, ouch, and not, oh, that wasn't so bad. It was all meant to be, like that kind of nonsense.
Yeah.
And you could translate that to cancer, the loss of a spouse, the death of a child. But I cannot tell you the number of people who come to me and want to know why their child died. They think it's their negativity. Like they're looking for, there must have been a vibration in the air, and their heart is breaking without being able to really feel that honestly. Yeah, because it's a pile of grief. It's awful. You can't move on. Everything else is a lie. I had a guy come in recently. He couldn't tell me what he did for a living. I could tell from his aura, he hated his job. But he would not tell me what he did because he said it'd be negative. So you want to move ahead in your life, but you can't stand to even just tell someone casually what you do. This phobia of saying anything upsetting. It's a very egocentric way of looking at life. Animals don't do this. Animals, wolves, they have an intuitive sense. When you're hurting, they take care of themselves. They rest. They grieve. Dogs grieve. They let the natural processing. They're not sitting there going, how can I chase after the rabbit faster? They rest. They pay attention to the natural instincts. It's humans that have this idea of how to be a better human. Wolves don't think about how to be a better wolf. It's the same idea of, if I do these 10 things, life is good, I'll be protected. It's a desire to be protected from all things that could happen because life is scary. I'm healthy because I'm positive. Well, no, sometimes it's luck. There's this idea that good things happen to good people who are positive. And bad things happen to bad people who are negative. So you don't want to be one of those. When in reality, everybody's a little bit of both.
Yeah.
So it's very nuanced. And my hope in this conversation to the audience is to give people a little space to think about the complexities involved in life and not just the binary positive, negative. Because what people are doing is if they have a negative thought over here, well, let me go swap it out with a positive thought over there. And maybe I'll meet in the middle with something lukewarm that's not quite either. It's not true. It's not honest. It's just sometimes we need the full range. I want you to feel exactly how you're feeling. It processes, and then there's a natural movement towards something else.
Yeah, for sure. It's an interesting thing. I've been in Florence now for a couple of years, almost 2 years. And at first, it was exciting and new and different. And now that it's been a couple of years, I can get under the hood a little bit. And this conversation is an interesting one because, I don't have the data to support any of this. It's more just empirical from, my perspective. But then I'll talk about the law of attraction here.
Exactly. This is a strangely Americanized idea.
It really is. And I spoke to a doctor, a friend of mine here once, and he said to me, he goes, "Why are you all so depressed in America?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You have everything. You have all the money. You have everything. 1 hour, Amazon delivers it. What do you all?" And I said, why do you ask that? He said, because he works in the hotels here and he treats mostly Americans. And he said, "I don't think I've ever seen an intake form with somebody that I examined who's not on an antidepressant." And I said, "That's not a thing here?" He goes, "No." He said, "Maybe 1 in 100. And I said, "Why do you think that is?" And he said, "We understand that life is not flat. There are highs, there are lows, and you will go up and down. And if we like you, we love you. If we hate you, we fucking hate you." He said, so for us, we're totally cool with the fact that it goes up and down. And living in this place of no feeling is so flat. So I think that's largely what you're saying here. Is that right?
Here to the audience, Rob is on to something. Because in this culture, I don't know where these ideas came from. There's this idea that pain is bad. So you either take a pill or you think positive, make it go away. The reason why I think people, to me, feel more alive is that there's less resistance to all feeling. Here in the States, we chase half of the spectrum, the happy feelings, and we shame and discard or repress the negative ones. You do that and you're half dead. You can't feel anything. You won't even admit it to yourself. So like I get a lot of clients, they show up, they present with antidepressants. And I stay in my lane. I say, look, if we can get you off those antidepressants with the guidance of your doctor, would you be open to that? And they're like, usually yes, because there's a lot of side effects. Helping people tolerate what they're really feeling, then you don't need all that stuff because anything fully felt starts to move. Now, unless you have some weird true chemical imbalance in your brain, which there might be a few, but in Italy, they don't have this idea that pain is bad. It's part of life. And this is uniquely American, I think, this idea that if you're crying, Rob, I don't want to see it. Or I'm going to go, oh my God, like it becomes this big drama to help you feel better when you might have just lost somebody. So that's what I'm getting right now. I get hundreds of people feeling like they are unable to sit with the reality that life is very tenuous sometimes.
For sure is. The reason why I want to spend a little bit of time on this is because many of the people who are listening to this now, they're older. They're certainly over 30. They're not probably 60. They're somewhere between 30 and 50. And they've been doing something for maybe 20 years. They're looking to do something different. They don't know what it is. The writing is on the wall that there's a time for a change. And they're trying to navigate that. But what comes with that is 20 years of thinking that the answer is more. More house, more cars, more money, more this, more that, more sex, more food, more. And then they start to realize that that game was a zero-sum game. It didn't get them anywhere. Not that having a nice house is not important. Look, I love all the things that everybody else does, but when that's your driver and that's where you're going, and then you got a wake-up call like you did, I wonder how much of things like the law of attraction are our desire to just continually manifest, continually get more, more and more and more. Because if I get this next car, this next spouse, this next house, then I'm going to be happy.
Absolutely. I love this question. And look what's happening to the planet with overconsumption. I mean, we're destroying the environment with continual consumption. We're like little worms, we're eating up everything. We're talking about the path of wisdom, not information. Wisdom is more a sense of, what is it that I really want? And finding the ability to be present with that now. People usually do the law of attraction to get something. I want 10 grand. I want this big ass house, whatever. What is the thing that you're really trying to create? It might be more love. It might feel like more abundance. How can I start to feel more of that right now? You'll discover that you don't need as much as you thought in order to feel truly wealthy. Elon Musk has whatever, billions. He still doesn't feel like it's enough, right? So it doesn't matter the dollar as much as the feeling. And this is where people working with you or working with me, you need a guide to help you. The ego is going to say, when I get that car, then I'll feel like I arrived. Is that true? Are you open to exploring what is the driver? Because you feel bankrupt now. So what can we do to help you feel more groovy now? And then if you want to get a car, sure. But you're absolutely right. I think on the path of wisdom, it starts in my client base. It starts around the age of 30. Between 28 and 32, I've noticed there's a big spiritual opening. I've seen this. 32 to maybe about 60, maybe upper 50s. There's a tremendous reevaluation. Early on, I would say around 32, there's a lot of anger. I've been sold a bill of goods. I've been living someone else's life. My dad wanted me to be a doctor. I went along with it, whatever. Or you start to see the impact of your parents' divorce. Dang, because of their messed up relationship, now I have to go to therapy. You're starting to see, wow, I'm impacted. I am victimized sort of by things that happened to me. It wasn't my fault. I was 2 and my dad took off. In a way, you were a victim. Right? It was something beyond your control. And once people can realize, oh, this did happen. Now, can we say that happened to you or for you? I don't find that framework very useful. I'd rather just sit with, this sucks, and not add on any more spiritual interpretation at that moment, because it's not making people feel better. I don't bother. If it starts to feel like a lecture, yeah, you're right. Everything's happening for my highest good. And you look at the client and they're not actually feeling any better. I don't go there, because what's happening is we got millions of people busting their butt, reading spiritual books, and everything's very intellectualized about vibration and law of attraction and manifesting. The heart still hurts. I don't care how many self-help books you read. If your heart still feels unsupported, there's not enough care around you. There's not enough of a village or community to hold you when you are in your depths. The Americans I think, are among the loneliest people on the planet. Why? Because we've romanticized this idea of super independence. Well, my goodness, as a human species, we were never designed to live alone in an apartment. We're supposed to be around a small community of people that might check in on you, and there are elders and kids running around. I mean, that was really how we evolved as people. But now in our modern culture, we don't live that way, and we're paying a price.
Well, listen, it's interesting. I've been here, like I said, for a couple of years. And so I'm able to sort of like look at things remotely. And I saw a statistic the other day. Last year, there were 705 mass shootings in the United States, and there were 0 in Italy. Not one. And my Italian teacher, she asked me, she said, why are the kids killing each other? We watch it like it's a movie. What is happening? And the only answer I have, sort of on the heels of this conversation, is there's such deep sadness that is just unaddressed.
Yes. Audience, pay attention. We're talking about pretty deep stuff that doesn't have any other forum to be addressed. And if this can reach 1 or 2 people and can help people feel less alone, less crazy, I think we've done our job. And the kids are just reflecting the sadness of their parents. Kids aren't born naturally sad. They don't know, but they're absorbing all of this from sad parents who have never lived the life they wanted, sad parents that are just going along with doing what's expected of them, or overwhelmed nuclear families that don't have grandparents, aunts, neighbors to help, or a single mom who's just, I mean, she's exhausted, and you think her kids are going to be happy? She's exhausted. She can't provide in that way. So yeah, we're all in this together, but I think you're absolutely right. We're sad.
We're sad. Yeah. You've said we need to realize the difference between aspiring to create more and do more and be more versus being happy. Can you unpack that a little bit more for me?
I go back to the basics of what is it that I want in terms of a feeling. A feeling is not a thing. Doesn't have zeros after it. It's a way of being, because without that compass, I'm going to look for something that makes sense. What is people have struggled with knowing what they want 9 out of 10 times in my experience, because their parents never really asked them. There's a thing in energetic development, because that's me. I try to step out of the psychological lens of things, because there's tons of this. If you want psychological stuff, it's easy to find. People read it, goes in and out 1 year. It doesn't transform. The thing that will transform is more energetic awareness. This is the path of wisdom. That's the whole point of your show. It's beneath the words. If you had parents, and this is not bashing parents, but if you are one, there's a difference between paying your kids attention, clothes, food, versus attunement. Attunement is knowing who your kids really are. My oldest child likes bananas. You give him pears, he doesn't like that. My middle child loves apples and soccer. And my third child just wants a book. If you don't know your children in that way, they have trouble finding themselves, because kids are a blank slate. Like, who am I? And that's what parenting should be about. The ability to know your children so that they can help know themselves, because they're screaming and crying. They're just a hot mess, right? They need somebody to reflect. And if there's nobody there physically, emotionally, and they're just screaming into the abyss, it's very hard for people to know what they want. So we've had generations of this. I think a lot of parents these days feel lost, and this is not bashing anyone. It's just, I would like to see more awareness around the energetic dance in relationships, and less of the book learning of the theory of this and, my attachment style is this. I haven't found that to be very useful. How about you?
Yeah, it's having an awareness of when we speak about children, certainly it's having an awareness who the kids are, what they're interested in, supporting them because you understand them, and then kind of getting out of their way and not putting your agenda, your vision, not the helicopter parent thing, and allowing them. It's interesting because I have an 8-year-old daughter now, and I have a 24-year-old. So I have the benefit of, how I raised the first one and
wisdom.
How I'm raising the second. Wisdom.
Yeah,
wisdom. Thank you. That's the word I'm looking for.
It's experience.
It's experience. Yeah. You just get better at it.
Yeah.
Okay. So as we start to wrap up here, I want to ask you a couple of things. One is, you've alluded a couple of times to the kind of work that you do in terms of energy work. Can you explain for the layman listening that doesn't really understand what that means, what is it exactly that you do?
Well, yeah, I'm basically a life mentor, and I work with thousands of people around the world around purpose. What are you here to be doing? Moving through anxiety and perfectionism, because that was my little nemesis. So most of my clients are typically fairly intelligent. There's usually there's a spiritual opening that's occurring that has nothing to do with reading about your chakras. It's more about, like, what the hell am I supposed to be doing in life? And they're usually sensitive. They feel differently. And so sometimes they've resorted to not being around people at all because it's too painful, high empathy, or they've disappeared into other people's problems, whatever. It's a sensitivity. So, people struggling with overwhelm, perfectionism, purpose, because once you get a sense of why you're here, everything else in terms of decision-making, selecting a life partner, whatever, there's a pull. You don't have to be so, hit or miss with things. There's a little bit more of an intention. Manifestation, that word, becomes easier because you kind of know what's you and what's not you. If you don't know, everything's a crapshoot. And most people don't know. That's why everything feels like a crapshoot. So, and my work, based on a lifetime of hard knocks, has much more of a wisdom approach, spiritual inquiry. My eyeballs see people's energetic fields. It's the least interesting thing about me, but I mean, I used to be reading people's energy fields in a doctor's office to try to figure out why people were having ulcers or whatever. And I still do that, but I don't lead with that anymore. But if people want me to read them, I will. But I really enjoy these down-to-earth conversations like that we're having. Yeah. Conversation is what will transform, whether it's on a podcast or with a client. What's going on that has you contracting inside? And then being able to discern what part is your mind and what part is the part of you that doesn't have words. You know, because right now people think they're their mind, their thoughts are everything. Well, it's part of it, but you're not just a bucket of thoughts. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of spiritual growth. I also do a lot of work around the sexual energy. I think that's really important because people are sort of outside their bodies right now. So feminine essence, masculine essence, because if you can feel that, you feel a little bit more juiced up naturally, and you can attract people a little bit easier, and you just feel more present. Like your previous guest talked a lot about the power of presence. How do you do that? You can do it somewhat with your mind, but I'd rather people use their body, breath, sexual energy, pump into that, and you'll be in the present easier. So yeah, I work with lots of people around the world, Zoom, some groups, some private, but it's a lot of fun.
Would you consider it sort of psychic work?
Some of it. But you know what? We're all psychic. Rob, I'm sure you are. You are. That your questions have that flavor. And I always encourage all my clients, by the time they're done working with me, they're psychic too. They don't see it that way. They've been watching too much TV, Paranormal State. They think I'm like, you just know things, right? You get a sense. Or sometimes there's a download of a message, and that can be more natural instead of, oh my God, I want to increase my psychic powers. Like that, it has a little bit more of an egoic flavor. Because if people want to be psychic, I always ask them why. Like, what is the motivation? And it's usually to stay safe, to know what other people are thinking so I can get something, right. Instead of just so that I can feel more in tune with me and be happier.
Yeah. The why question is such a powerful question because it really forces you to go inside and go, well, why?
Well, why? Yeah. What's driving that? And, there's a way to ask why. So it's not why, but why, because a lot of people ask why, but they're very intellectual about it. I wonder why I think that. Why do I do that? That must be because when I was 5, my mom, there's this whole narrative, but that's not transforming anything. It's just a story that keeps going on instead of going, why? Like a little bit more of an open feeling instead of jumping into my dad was this way, my mom was that way. It's part of it, but it's not the whole thing.
All right. I've got 2 questions for you left. The first one is I'm really curious to hear your answer. What does your next chapter look like for you if you have one?
Oh, I'm trying to figure that out right now. I'm sad beyond words because of the loss of my husband. And yet I know he wouldn't want me to just, disappear. There are some new things that are possible when you're not in a partnership, meaning I could maybe try a few more things around the world that, in terms of travel, makes it easier. But I haven't really decided yet. I think it's going to be more conversations like what we're having. Love to have you as a guest on my show. I want to talk only about things that matter. One thing I've learned from this experience, and I shared this with all my clients this week, I said, life is short. At this point, I only want to talk about the things that matter. Everything else is noise. If you're not interested in having conversations about where the juice is, what's really going on, honestly, having a raw, engaging conversation, I'm not for you, because let's not waste the time. And all my clients went like this, like, oh my God, that's what we want. So because when you're aware of the brevity of how short life is, there's a little bit more sense of urgency.
Last question. What one question would you like to ask me?
What is your most juicy issue that you love to sit with your clients? Because I'm sure you help people with a lot of things, but if you could talk all day long about that, what would it be for you?
There's nothing that makes me happier than when someone wants to work with me who has been doing something for a period of time in their life, and they have been going through the motions, and they're starting to phone it in, and they're recognizing the challenge of the amount of money that they're making doing it, the ease in which they do it. They can do it in their sleep. And the struggle that they're having, saying it's almost not even worth it anymore, the money I'm making. And when I ask that why question about, well, what is it that you would really love to be doing? And when I could see that, they give me an answer, it's like 70, 80%, and I can go a little deeper and I can go, okay, yeah, I know, but what's the thing that you really would like if you had all the money in the world, all the time in the world, and all of that, but like, what would you love to be doing? And then there's that moment where they go, well, I know this sounds crazy.
Yeah.
And I go, that's it.
Bingo.
When we can sit in that pocket, and at the end of it, when they say, do you really think I could, could that really be my life? There's a difference between that 98% that they get to, and that if I could fucking have that in my life, holy shit, I would be so like that 2% that they can unlock. That to me, that's sexual energy for me. That's the thing that gets me really excited, because I know it. I know what it feels like. I know that every time I hear that church bell ringing, I know that happened because I got honest with myself about what I really wanted for the stage of my life. I took action on it, and now I'm living it, and I want that for people. So that's the thing that gets me excited. Oh my gosh.
And the world needs that. The amount of untapped dreams, or, I'm sure being a chiropractor, like for me, I was in corporate for quite a while. It was fine at the time. It was not a mistake. It was fine, no. But you outgrow it. And there's still so much human potential once you hit 30, 35, 40, whatever it is, when you get that calling to do something else. The amount of waste if people don't. And then imagine if people get lit, either through this show, working with you, working with me, that spark goes out. And that's what the world needs right now, instead of this pull down to mediocrity, right? Because the mass consciousness pulls everybody down to, well, what are you complaining about? You should be grateful, blah, blah, blah. And that does not feel good. It's never enough, that feeling of settling, because what we want is always on the other side of risk. There's always but man, imagine what this planet could be like if people dared to dream again. So amazing. I find that exciting. That's great.
It's a great note to wrap this up on. Are there any final words, suggestions, or an ask?
Not really. I have enjoyed this conversation because you're an excellent host, because I look for podcasts where we can go deeper, and same with my podcast. Sometimes I'm just yapping at myself because I'm not into the chirpy positive thing. I'm just like, there are enough of those. Right. But life is complex, especially as you get older. There's more to consider, more wisdom than information. Well, that's what we want. Got tons of information, not enough wisdom. So who are going to be the wisdom growers, the people that inspire? That's the community I want for what I want to be part of. So I am loving this conversation. People want to talk to me. I'm pretty easy to found on the internet, Google my name. I work with people one-on-one. Sometimes it's in a group. I always say I have no idea what's best for people until they talk to me, because I know the things I solve. I also know sometimes people need something else. I know the things I'm really good at, and sometimes people need, I don't know, something else. I can refer them.
Whatever. Yeah. Okay, we'll link it all up in the show notes. Adele, thank you for taking the time.
Thank you. This has been so much fun.
Interrupt your pattern. It's not working for you or your business anymore. Your day-to-day life is consuming your potential, and if you're really honest, you're hungry for a group of entrepreneurial couples that will help you stimulate growth and innovation in your business. Entrepreneurs come up with brilliant new ideas by exposing themselves to new and different experiences. So come with us. Your next experience awaits. Check out the link in the description to learn more.